Welcome to Words with Writers. I'm Kathy Beal, and my guest today is Gregory G. Allen.
Hello,
I
hello,
know him
hello.
as Greg Allen, and I've invited him here because of his latest book. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about him. And I'm going to read. Gregory G. Allen is an award-winning author, screenwriter, filmmaker, actor, and storyteller. He has been in the entertainment industry for 35 years, having acted in plays, musicals, TV, film, children's theater, and national tours such as, I love this one, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I love Donatello. And
Cowabunga, dude.
and Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. He's the award winning author of 4 children's books, 4 adult novels, 1 nonfiction memoir, and 2 short stories. His latest book, and the reason for our conversation today, is The Monsters of Marymount Mansion. Hey, Greg.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for having me on. I
It's been so
appreciate it.
it's been so exciting to see. Your book is just launched and you are all over the place talking to people about it. I'd like to talk first about the book and then about how it fits in with your body of work. See, so your book is The Monsters of Marymount Mansion, which is actually geared toward what age?
So it is
Technically.
for basically first through fourth grade. It's an early reader chapter book.
It seems to me, though, it's one of those message for all ages trappings of a children's book. So, can you tell us a little bit about the story?
Absolutely. The Monsters of Marymount Mansion is a group of monsters that live downstairs in the basement of this mansion. And Celeste Marymount, the mansion's been in her family for years. She runs it. She's a woman in her 70s. She has a couple people that help her there in the house because they're still a small bed and breakfast. She will get a few people that come in, but as I say, that the highway went around the town years ago, so people stopped coming down to her mansion. No one knows about the monsters except for her. She's kept the secret for years. She will allow them to come up every year on Halloween and join in on a party because, of course, no one knows who they are. They just think it's some people she's invited that happen to be in monster costumes. And some years they've even won some of the best costume awards. She has a particular fondness for an 8-year-old monster named Toby. She has watched him. She saw him be born. She watched him take his first step, have his first words. She really thinks of him and his little sister Michaela as grandchildren. She's not as close to her own family. They don't come around. So at one point, one of her workers says, "Yeah, but we're like your family. You know, it's chosen family." And she talks about that. And Celeste starts to see the monsters as her chosen family. And this particular year, she tells Toby that she's talked to his mother and they've decided he can go out for the first time ever and go trick-or-treating on Halloween. So it's a very big deal for him. I do want people to know, yes, we're in November now. The book is not just a Halloween book. Toby continues his adventures through Thanksgiving, Christmas, into the new year. So it follows us all through fall and in winter.
What was your inspiration for this? This is an outgrowth of an idea you had a long time ago, right?
It is. So, as you know, I've been traveling to schools, I would say the past 12 years. I think it was 12 years ago, I wrote my first children's book, which happens to be about my godson with autism. And so schools always have me come and speak to them during Autism Awareness Month. Well, I was standing there one time and I had an Oprah aha moment where I thought, I'm sitting there telling them how it's okay to be different and don't be afraid of someone because they have autism just because they're different. And I went, whew, I've been telling this story since I was a teenager. Because back in Texas, I was part of a children's theater company all through, I think I found them the summer after 8th grade, all the way through my senior year. And the woman that ran that company allowed me to write. And she produced my first musical I ever wrote, the Halloween of my sophomore year. It was called Dracula Bites at Dusk. I think the movie Dracula Bites, it was all around that same time. And part of that story was Dracula and some other monsters and vampires and mummies. They all lived down in the basement of this hotel. That's all I remember from that story. But that was the germ for this. I had asked mom, I'm like, Ma, is there a script somewhere? And she's like, no, we have it on a VHS tape. That's all we have. And I'm like,
Hmm.
I don't have, this was last year I was working. I'm like, I don't have a VCR in 2022, so I really can't watch it. I just stuck to that thought. And I'm like, well, what if I get rid of the vampires and everything and it's just about the monsters? And let me zero in on a child monster for this story. And I honestly thought it would be a picture book like my previous three children's books. And I wrote it first as a picture book, and I shared it with my sister, and I shared my mother and some other beta readers. And my sister said, "There's too much. Toby has too much story to tell. It can't happen in a 32-page picture book." So that's how I wrote my first chapter book. As you said, I have written adult novels, but I never gone down the road of a chapter book for kids. So that was interesting research on-site training on how to get it done. But I have to say I'm so proud of the book because it is like nothing I've ever done before. And it's doing really, really well. People are tuning into the story of self-acceptance, of diversity, of chosen family, all these messages that are in the book for kids to take away. They are absolutely getting them. And I would say every review that has come out in the past 4 weeks, they've all mentioned those messages too, and how important it is for kids now.
What got my attention, well, actually, there were a few characteristics that got my attention as I was reading it. And the first one was there are multiple types of monsters. There,
Yes.
there, you don't learn till the end that there's one monster that's really very different from the ones who are the main characters.
Right. That was important to me as well because even whenever I do picture books, I want them to be as diverse as possible. So when I'm working with an illustrator, I talk about let's make sure every face a child reading this book is not looking at their own white face. I want other faces. And especially like when I did Irving the Theater Nut, um, we turned it into a short film during the pandemic. And the little girl that played the lead girl from the book, when she saw the book, who was a brown faced girl in the book, she goes, she looks just like me. And she was so excited to see a child in this book that looked like her. That meant the world to me. So I thought, well, let's make sure in telling this story, if it's all about acceptance and being diverse, I don't just want the humans to be diverse. Let's make sure the monsters are diverse too. It's not like they all arrive from the same planet or wherever monsters come from, and so that they're all alike. I make sure I describe them differently. And then my illustrator did a wonderful job peppering illustrate black and white illustrations throughout to show how they're different as well.
It also really got my attention in a kind of uncomfortable way that they live in the basement and they have to stay there for their own safety. Now, is that a coded message or was it just I mean, that seemed
Well,
pretty like a pretty strong metaphor right there.
I think it's a very strong metaphor because I think it is about, Toby wanting to come out of that basement and live in the real world. I also drew parallels to the Diary of Anne Frank.
Mm.
So as I'm writing it, I had that in my head. So much so that Mrs. Vanderpang is a single monster, older monster that lives with Toby's family. And I was thinking of in the movie Mrs. Von Dam, but her real name was Mrs. Van Pills because I had been watching was it what was on? It was a Disney show or something. I can't remember the name of the movie now. This past year, a series that was on, and they used her real name. It wasn't Von Dam. They used Van Peel, and I went, "Oh, this character. I'm really basing her. I can tell I'm basing her on Mrs. Van Peel. Let me keep the V and the P." And I named my monster Mrs. Vanderpang. So these are things that nobody would ever know, but they're things that excite me when I do it. And you had mentioned the other monster literally came to me while I was writing the book. I thought, okay, Toby keeps going outside I need something else. I need some other kind of adventure. Oh, they're going to talk about Gymnasium, this mysterious monster that nobody knows, but he's been the folklore for years that lives somewhere else down underneath the house. And that's how that came to be, just because my brain went click. I need Toby to go on a venture in his own world, not just out in the real world. And so, yeah, I don't always sit down and write out the plots of these. It happens as I'm writing, even with something as small as this children's chapter book. And I'm like, oh, this is where this needs to go now. I need that soothsayer, that wise person, that wise entity, monster that Toby can seek out.
Um, that brings to mind, well, actually, there are two other elements I want to talk about. So remind me that there's one that I haven't mentioned yet that doesn't have to do with monsters. But Toby is very different from the monsters. I mean, he's clearly different when he goes out in the world, but he has personality traits that are different from what he's living with. How do you explain that?
Well, and it's funny
He,
because
he goes and he finds well, that's a spoiler, sorry. The monster of folklore.
yep.
Finds out he's
Yeah.
real.
And also, as I was describing him, I'm like, okay, you can't rely on visuals, even though Shelby Goodwin, my illustrator, did an amazing job. And when she created the cover for me and I saw Toby the first time, I was thrilled. But it's all in how am I going to describe these characters, which I would not go into detail describing in a picture book. But here I'm like, he has, I say it on the back. Toby has skin like a fish, fur like a dog, and smells like cotton candy when he gets excited. These are just things that came to me that I wanted to layer on him so that kids would be pulled into him. And by when he gets excited, I mean when he farts, he smells like cotton candy. So the fact that you say fart in a book, kids like that. And then when Celeste is talking about him earlier in the book, it's like, but Toby was different from, because she thought, well, he could go to school if it was not the fact that he's a monster. But Toby was different than other children. And it's all laid out how. And one of them is even his voice doesn't sound like other humans when he speaks. So I've had to deal with that now going out on my events and reading from the book. I'm like, oh, how do I want Toby to sound? And, as an actor, when I'm reading a book, I'm taking on the characters. And I have to say, Toby keeps changing with every event I've gone to. I can't zero in on what I want his voice to be, but it's absolutely different each time. And I try to do something different with my voice of, where is he in this world? But yeah, he's definitely, he's an adventurer. He's a seeker. He wants to find some truth. His little sister's like, hey, we're just having fun. Let's just play down here. She says, are we going to drop the apple again from the top of the staircase to let it go down at New Year's Eve? And in my brain, it's like, well, these are things that Toby's come up with to keep his little sister occupied each year. Oh, the apple falls in Times Square. They drop an apple down their staircase, So I think of him as this little creative soul that's just bubbling with enthusiasm and just a real desire to learn.
Which leads me to the interesting character of an ally. Celeste struck me immediately. Like, they have an ally.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I had beta readers for this last spring, before the book was being sent to the editor or anything, I had a PDF and I contacted a good friend of mine who teaches first grade. And I said, can you please just read this aloud to your class? I mean, first grade can't read it yet. She read a chapter every day. I went in and talked to them. They drew me pictures of what they thought the monsters looked like since there were no illustrations. Mm-hmm. And something that was so interesting was, so we're doing a Q&A and they were asked, who's your favorite character? And the amount of kids that said Celeste, because she took care of the monsters. I went, these are the most empathetic first graders. And I was so happy because I think we are missing empathy in the world.
Yeah.
And I can help try with my children's books to try to make children understand empathy. I think that's an important thing. But they did zero in on Celeste because of her caregiving and, as you say, as being an ally.
Well, it wasn't hard for me to also draw a parallel here to uh, people being hidden because it isn't safe, and gay community being closeted, and there being an ally, an older single woman. So I resonate with this one.
You're like, oh, there I am. Well, don't we all
There's
look for ourselves when we read a book, whatever
Well,
book it
I
may be?
wasn't, but that was one streak of it that I saw that fit, and it sort of resonated with. So, just a second, going back to the beta testers, did you have any older children read it, or was it just a first grade class?
No, I had older children read it as well, and some friends of mine like gave it to their children so they could read. And one of the interesting things is, so the kids would give me the feedback on what they were drawn to, what they loved. The adults would give me feedback on, oh, make sure you change this word, change that word, this phrase, this section is too hard for kids to understand. But then even with writing a chapter book, you have to remember that each grade, these kids are learning more. So you have to throw in words that may make them question, well, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so they go to the adult or the teacher and they help them with that word. And so my editor and I worked a lot on those too, like rounding out what word choices and things of that nature. But yeah, even my niece, I have a niece that is in the third grade this year, third grade. Thinking back because she was reading it last year. She read it and she was drawing me pictures too. So when the book came out, I sent it to them first, and she looked at Toby and she goes, "Well, I was close, but I drew him with one eye instead of two."
Oh, that's so funny. Before I move on to where this fits in your work, you had a really fun cross promotion with an ice cream parlor.
Yes. So I always thinking outside the box, always saying that different is okay. For my book launch, I went, all right, I could go to a bookstore, like everyone launches a book, or I could think outside the box. And so I thought outside the box. And this is all about a historic mansion. My brain started going to historic mansions. And of course, I used to know one in Bloomfield, New Jersey. And I'm like, oh, no, what is there something close here? And right here in my town is the John Ray House, which is a historic house that is owned by the Passaic County. Um, and it's their art center. So I went to them and I was like, this sounds weird, I'm sure. Can we do this? And absolutely. That's where I was going to have the book launch. Right across the street is the Goffle Creamery, a brand new, they've been there probably about a year now, I believe. And so I went over and talked to them and I said, could you just help me promote it? And, I could leave some flyers here. And they're like, no, we want to do more than that. And they created a green ice cream, tasted like cotton candy. It was awesome. It was so awesome what they did. They were so supportive.
Was
And
it
people went to the launch and they would go over there and get ice cream. And they kept the ice cream on the menu that week so people could stop in and ask for the Toby.
the Toby? That is great. I remember seeing a photo of it. That's wonderful. And you've got a cutout of him that goes with
I
you.
did. So my friend Matt made me he surprised me at my book launch, and he free-handed on wood the same Toby sitting here on top of the cover. And so now when I go places, Toby can sit on the edge of my table at whatever event I'm at.
That is perfect.
I have very good friends.
Don't we know that that is an important thing? So this it struck me, and the reason I wanted to talk to you is that I have seen a through line in your work. I've read your memoir, I've read some of your novels, not all of them. I have seen one of your films that scared the daylights out of me because it was like half an inch away from what's going on now. And it seems to me there is a through line in all of your work about the challenge of being different, of grappling with being different, of finding your place, or being safe being different. Would that be a correct statement?
I absolutely think it's a correct statement. And Arthur Wooten, a friend of mine who is a writer and he writes for Passport Magazine, wrote an article on me when Hiding in Daylight came out, and he called me the accidental activist. Is that the way he worded it? And I'm like, it's true. I never meant to become this advocate that I am. But it really happened. And I say I can look to 12 years ago with Chicken Boy and saw that it changed the trajectory of me as a writer. Because then suddenly, even though that was just about my godson, I became an advocate for autism awareness. And I knew that I did because then I was going to all of these schools. And I always tell people I'm not an expert. I'm not a doctor. I'm not even a parent. I'm just this guy who loves his godson and wants to make sure that people know, don't be afraid of my godson because he's flapping his arms and making a weird sound when you see him out and sounding like a bird saying baka. Then while speaking of that, I noticed I'm like, no, I've always been doing this. I was doing it before that. Everything I write, Well with My Soul, is about acceptance, is about diversity, is about the LGBTQ community. There's so much of what I write that I do feel I'm like, if I'm just this tiny little voice that can get these stories out there, whether they be to adults or to children, I'm happy being that voice because I don't know how many people are saying it. You were talking about Hiding in Daylight, the one that scared the crap out of you, which people can still, it's on Amazon Prime. People can go look for it and watch. It's a short film. It's less than 15 minutes, but it is all about a gay purge, and two couples living in the United States after a gay purge. And so this dystopian future of the lesbian couple and the male gay couple have to pretend like they're married to the opposite just to survive. And they come together and close the windows and hide once a week to play this game of what was life used to be like before all of this. And let's just pretend we're back there and we're a lesbian couple and a gay couple. And once again, hiding, clandestine, hiding down in a basement. So yeah, I think you are correct to see that through line in my work. And I think I probably just keep trying to tell that story in different ways, because it is the most important to me. Even Irving, my book about the squirrel is called Irving the Theater Nut. He does not want to gather nuts and be like other squirrels. He just wants to perform on stage. And he sits in a theater window and watches the little kids rehearsing. And that's what he wants to do. And that goes back to, and I say this in my speeches to kids, how many kids here love to play soccer? How many like to sing in the choir? And I say, look how different everybody is in the room. You do not all have to do the same thing. And you can be different and do different things. And that's all fine. So that's what Irving was about, really was. It's fine if you want to be the kid that sings instead of gathering nuts.
That can be a dangerous job when you're in junior high. You can certainly be made fun of for being that kid.
Well, I was that kid. I did not like sports. I was in choir my whole life. I was in doing as much theater as I could get my hands on. And it's funny, we lived in a very small town outside of Wichita Falls. And fourth grade, I was becoming the big dog in that little town. I played Elvis that year. I went to Wichita Falls and auditioned for this review, and I sang a solo in front of 2,000 people. And I was so excited to finally be the next year getting to be into fifth grade there. And then my parents said, we're moving. And I literally thought that they had pulled the rug out from under me. They were ruining my life. How can you do this to me? And we moved to the suburb of Dallas. An entire world was opening up to me that I did not know it was going to be so much better getting out of that small town is what happened. And yeah, we moved there and I was doing, you could do all this theater in school. And then what's this? There's children's theater outside of school. And there's the civic theater, the community theater where you can go perform. And so I did all of that. I was not the sports guy. So was I made fun of? Absolutely, I was made fun of. But you find your chosen family, you find your other monsters, and you create your own group of people.
You look for the allies.
Yeah, look for the ally. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, And this also fits in your semi-autobiographical novels too, right? It's a more specialized theme of the path of acceptance as a gay person.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to think. Are you thinking of with Proud Pants that became my movie Mother? That
Possibly.
yeah, I wrote that about my brother. So I had a half brother that we shared the same father, and I wrote a story all about him. That was just the first thing I ever wrote, and I called it a novelette because it was too long to be a short story and too short to be a novel. And it was literally about him dying. He died at 34 years old. He had a brain tumor, but doctors just thought he was a drug addict and just kind of wrote him off. And, we're not even going to look for a tumor because obviously you're dying of drugs. And so I wrote the book thinking back on my whole life with him and what he must have been thinking of on that deathbed as he was looking back on his life. So I wrote it through his point of view, even though I was the one writing it. So it was kind of a memoir, a non-memoir, an unmemoir. I got some dings for doing that. Some people's like, memoir should not even be in this title. This is not his words. And they are correct because we all see things differently. Um, I say my brother watching the way he led his life, and it was a very sad life, and he didn't really excel or push himself to do anything. It caused me to work harder and want to always be the best at everything I could and be the peacemaker and be all these kinds of things watching his life. So I attribute the way I turned out a lot to watching him grow up. So that's how that ended up becoming a book. And then it became my first short film, Mother, which was kind of a love letter to my own mom because that was his stepmom and she was the one doing so much through him through his life and there with him when he died.
I think I had confused this with Well with My Soul
Oh,
because yeah,
oh, well, with my soul is really there are a lot of truths in there, and there's a lot of fiction in Well with My Soul. Well with My Soul, I call it a fiction novel. When the people that part of it was based on had passed away, I finally started saying, okay, this was about the story when I first moved to New York and the church I found on the Upper West Side and that I went to, and a preacher had been a gay man and God changed in his life and he became a preacher, part of the Southern Baptist Convention. And I was the music minister of the church. So a lot of that found its way in that story. And then I made up a lot of characters. I made it more about two brothers. And the second brother was a completely fabricated character just to have a counterbalance to the preacher that I was writing about.
but still there's this theme of coming to grips with who you really are and being comfortable with it because you did have one character, the preacher, who really wasn't comfortable with who he was.
Not comfortable at all. Right. Yeah. Not at all. And sadly, that was so much of that part was absolutely true. And watching that happen in the late 80s and early 90s when I moved to New York and I was so much a part of that church. I was with him all the time. What are you going to preach on this week? Well, then here are the songs. I'm looking over here right now on my bookshelf. There's all of my hymnals that I was choosing my music from. I still have everything right there next to a copy of Well with My Soul, as a matter of fact.
Well, so it does it seems to me it doesn't matter what the trappings of the story are that you have told, that anybody can relate to anything you have written simply from the perspective of here is a tale of someone that is outside mainstream society and finding their own way somehow. Well, hiding in daylight's a little more like the dangers of it, but still. So I think that the Monsters of Marymount Mansion is something. It's one of those books that's going to end up being something that's given to adults as well, and they'll tear up over, or they'll love, or they'll go get a cotton candy machine and have it at their parties, which I've seen.
Yeah, I think I'm always going to be for what many people will say the underdog, or I'm always going to I champion independence, the person that sets out to try something different and not be afraid of it. I'm really big on pay it forward. I have been since I got on social media when I started writing. And I was told, you must be on social media if you're an author to get people to buy your books. And I thought, I cannot go out here and beg people to buy books. So instead, I just live my authentic life on social media to the detriment of anyone watching this. I'm sorry. I know you all get sick of seeing what I do every day, but I just share my life.
Class.
And then people go, oh, you write books. And then they buy my books. I don't go and beg. And then I'm also very, very big on pay it forward. And I was on Twitter forever until it fell apart. But I will share other indie authors and other indie filmmakers. And, oh, this person's trying to raise money to get that film done. Oh, look, they're almost to their thing. Let me just go donate. And so that's just how I really feel like I've lived the past 15 years of my life, because I am about that person that's trying to either do something new, do something on their own, build their own company. I'm all about that. I really am.
And full disclosure here, Greg blurbed both of my books. So he's got cover blurbs on the existing book and the one that's coming out very, very soon. So with that, would you tell people where they can find you? You have several websites.
I do. So I finally decided this year, before this came out, I'm like, okay, I need a kid's website for these books. So gregsimagination.com lists all four of my children's books, how I can come speak to your schools, how you can buy the books, reviews, all that kind of stuff. And then gregorygallen.com, and you do have to put the G in there. That held over from back when I was in equity, and there was another Gregory Allen. I had to do a middle initial. So I just kept it as a writer, Gregory G. Allen. But gregorygallen.com has everything from my film work, my acting, my writing. It's all there on that website.
Wonderful. Well, thanks an awful lot. It's been really fun, and I like this book a lot. It's been blast.
Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate that.
So you and Toby just go enjoy the holidays. And all the rest of you go read about Toby.
Yes, please do. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Bye, everybody.